now 6 o'clock, and the September 18, 2014 meeting of the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission is now in session. I'd like to welcome you all to this session of our commission meeting. I want to remind you that we abide by the open meeting law. Since this is an open meeting, and as such, BRPC records it as it does all other meetings. Other people may record the meeting after informing the chair, and any documents presented must be left with the chair. This time I'll request that the clerk call the roll.
Adams. Alford. Beckett. Cheshire. Clarksburg. Dalton. Egremont. Florida. Great Barrington. Hancock. Hinsdale.
Dickerson, alternate delegate.
Lanesboro.
Dickey, alternate.
Lee. Lennox.
Nolasco, alternate.
Monterey. Mount Washington. New Ashton. New Marlborough.
James Mullen, delegate.
North Adams.
Kyle Hanneman, delegate.
Otis. Peru.
Sam Haupt, delegate.
Pittsfield.
Sheila Irvin, delegate.
C.J. Haas, alternate.
Richmond.
Richard Bell, alternate.
Sandusfield. Savoy. Sheffield.
Wood, alternate.
Stockbridge. Murray Raftery, alternate. Tyringham.
Hudson, alternate.
Washington. West Stockbridge. Williamstown.
Roger Bolton, alternate.
Windsor. Thirteen delegates.
13, we have 4. At this time, I'd like to thank BCC for hosting this important public meeting about a topic that has an effect on many, many areas of Berkshire County. Ellen Kennedy, president of BCC, had wanted to be here, but she had a conflict in her schedule, so unfortunately she can't be with us. To kind of reiterate the purpose of this meeting, it's to hear from the project proponent, Kinder Morgan, and from a respected New England environmental organization with deep background in regional energy issues and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, what you're seeing often as FERC, how they do the permitting process, and that is the Conservation Law Foundation. This is a chance to educate the Commission about the proposed project and its possible involvement in it. This is not a public hearing, and people are welcome to be here, but we ask that they respectfully listen to all the speakers and allow the Commission to do its job. There will be other opportunities for people and organizations to ask questions and to make their views known. At this time, I would like to turn the meeting over to Dr. Jason McCandless, the superintendent of the Pittsfield Public Schools, who has graciously agreed to moderate this meeting. Thank you, Dr. McCandless.
Thank you, Ms. Irvin. I'm going to lay out the ground rules and how this is going to work this evening, and then we'll begin with the presentations. We will begin with a half an hour for the Kinder Morgan presentation, followed by a half an hour for questions from the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission delegates and alternates. We'll then take a 10-minute break. We will then hear for a half an hour from the Conservation Law Foundation, and then have another half an hour again for Berkshire Regional Planning Commissioners to question the representative of the Conservation Law Foundation. If we do not take the full half hour for any of these, we will simply move on. We certainly request here tonight that everyone is respectful of all speakers. Per Berkshire Community College policy, no banners or posters are allowed in the auditorium. We ask that you do not either jeer or cheer any of the speakers or questioners. Just please let them do their jobs, and as we say in public school world, we'll act like the children are watching us. And if you cannot abide by those rules, we will have to ask you to leave the premises. So at this point, I would like to introduce Alan Four, Kinder Morgan Public Affairs Vice President, for the Kinder Morgan presentation.
Thank you, Superintendent and members of the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission. I'm Alan Four with Kinder Morgan. We're pleased to be here tonight at what I believe is our 35th town hall type presentation about our proposed project for the region. First, let me introduce other members of my team that are here and will assist with the Q&A piece. Dodson Skipworth with our commercial and business development team, Mark Hamrick, our project manager, and Jim Hartman with our land team. So what we want to do tonight is talk to you a little bit about our company and what we do and what our proposed project is all about, what the next steps are in our schedule, our planned schedule, and be happy to respond to questions that the panel has for us tonight. Kinder Morgan is a pipeline transportation and storage company. We don't sell gas and we don't drill for gas. We simply transport it. We're a midstream company. And we transport gas to New England and have been doing so for over 50 years. So what we're talking about tonight is an expansion of an existing system that has served the region for a very long time. This slide shows a copy of our natural gas pipeline distribution system across the United States. We have about 70,000 miles of natural gas pipeline, and we are the leading transporter of natural gas in the country. And you can see by these various pipes that we pretty much serve the entire United States. And we can transport energy from the various shale plays across the country. Traditionally, gas to this region has come from the Gulf region and the shales there, and to some extent the western Rockies region. More recently, in the last 20 years, you can see in the top upper right part of the slide, the Marcellus Shale, and that's currently where most of the gas for the region is coming from, and that's likely to continue for many years. So to the Tennessee Gas Pipeline System, this is about a 13,000 mile system that serves about 35 million households in the southeastern and northeastern United States. As I mentioned, it's been in service for about 50 years, transporting natural gas to the region. So as part of our current natural gas infrastructure, we serve almost all of the LDCs in the region, and this is a list of those LDCs. LDCs are local distribution companies. We deliver the gas to them. They then deliver the gas to homes and businesses throughout the region. So you can see the LDCs and the power generators as well. And our system, our new system, an expanded system, will also be serving many of these same customers. As part of our current 600-mile pipeline network in Massachusetts, we are servicing a number of regions of the state, and these towns that are listed are towns that are somehow impacted by our current infrastructure system. So I've said it often at forums, if you want to see what our current system looks like, you can certainly go to any of these areas and see our pipeline right-of-way and our operations in those particular areas. And this slide shows some of those areas specifically. What does post-construction pipeline right-of-way look like in some of the towns that were mentioned in the previous slide? Well, these are actual pictures of post-construction pipeline right-of-way. You've probably all seen the above-ground markers that are shown. Those are plastic markers that are in the ground to indicate that in that area underneath there is an existing natural gas pipeline. And those are our pipeline systems throughout New Hampshire and Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, and the region. Also, above-ground infrastructure is a part of a pipeline system. The pipeline is buried, but there are some above-ground appurtenances that are part of a pipeline system. And this slide shows a compressor station, and there will be compressor stations that are part of our expansion project. This is a typical size and scope of a compressor station. They don't all look exactly like this, but this is the most recent one we've constructed in Massachusetts as part of our existing system. And also mainline valves. You'll see those scattered across the system as well. Those are above ground, usually less than an acre facilities for the system. Those are pretty much what you're going to see above ground for natural gas infrastructure. So in Massachusetts, I mentioned we have 600 miles of pipeline in our current system. You can see here the payroll numbers and the taxes that we pay in the state and our offices in the state, Agawam and Hopkinton. And again, we've had a long presence here, a long time presence in the region, servicing customers, consumers, homes, and businesses. So natural gas in New England, obviously a big item of discussion and policy-wise and supply-wise of how the region is going to be serviced in the future, currently and in the future. So some interesting statistics, and we've tried to cite all of these statistics, and we'd be happy to provide the presentation to the members for distribution or posting as you see fit. But this slide, I think, goes a long way in showing what the current supply is for the region. The 52% of current electric supply, electric generation, that's not natural gas, that's electric, is coming from natural gas. That number continues to rise as other sources of energy, such as nuclear, coal, and fuel oil go down, renewables go up, and natural gas goes up. So over half of the current electric load is borne by natural gas. Also the region, the gas is coming from the Marcellus Shale region. About 60% now, and we anticipate, or the industry and analysts expect in the next 10 years, about 90% of the gas will be coming from the shale region. So, what is our project, and why are we pursuing this project, and what is the need for additional natural gas infrastructure? Well, it's really not Kinder Morgan or Tennessee Gas saying it. It's the policymakers saying it. It's the ISO saying it. It's NESCO. It's those who are monitoring and managing the grid, the network of energy in the region that is saying that there's a crisis. There's a need for, an urgent need for additional energy infrastructure. The governors collectively have cited a significant need for energy efficiency, but also natural gas pipeline infrastructure specifically to address the long-term needs of the region. Again, as more reliance is coming on natural gas as other fossil fuels are not being relied upon. This is an example of that. You're retiring Brayton Point or Vermont Yankee and other facilities. Those are retiring facilities. To make up that load for the energy supply to the region, natural gas is continuing to be more relied upon. So the pipes servicing the region, our system and other systems serving the region are full. So the only way to bring in additional natural gas is additional pipeline infrastructure. Long-term, reliable natural gas is infrastructure. The cost, too, is certainly something that should not be ignored. $3 billion estimated in the last winter heating season, additional costs paid by Massachusetts and New England consumers because of a lack of pipeline infrastructure, a lack of natural gas supply coming into the region, which also, ironically, required these power generators and others to burn more of the same fuels that the states are trying to use less of, fuel, oil, and coal, because they simply didn't have enough natural gas supply, and that increased CO2 emissions. So the policymakers, the ISO, the NESCO, and others, also companies that are distributing gas, and these are a couple examples of individual companies that have said, for example, a new pipeline is not an option, it's a necessity, coming from the companies who are distributing gas to homes and businesses in the region. So we're taking a look at all of this and seeing how we can, as one of the leading suppliers to the region of natural gas, can increase our ability to supply. Berkshire Gas, which is servicing this region, issued a statement indicating their needs for additional natural gas infrastructure. That's to service current customers, that's to serve an expanded base of customers, and that's for economic development. So very big concern of theirs. Maine is also a big part of the potential part of this project. We filed some documents yesterday with the state of Maine seeking to be part of their proposed expansion of natural gas infrastructure. The Boston Globe did a survey that I think amplified some of the concerns of folks about the need for additional natural gas infrastructure. And the policymakers themselves, the Department of Energy and Environment Secretary recently talked about they're projecting, because of constraints in gas supply, again this winter, natural gas prices will go up, and that affects homes and businesses in the region. And the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, also talking about a need for long-term natural gas solutions. So what we have done is put out a project called Northeast Energy Direct that we are exploring, and we've been exploring for several months now through forums like this and through consultations with regulatory agencies and others to try to develop a project that can service the needs that were referenced in some of the previous slides. So how do we know beyond what folks are telling us about a need? How do we know that for certain in our mind from a commercial perspective? This is a big project, no question about it. It's going to be a part of a very spirited discussion over the next few years about the need and the importance of something like this. We do that through commercial contracts. And what we announced a couple of months ago were 12 local distribution companies in New England who signed on for firm long-term commitments on our pipeline project. That means that they are committing over the long term to gas supply from our new system. A lot of these are customers on our current system, but they're saying in the long term that they need additional natural gas supply for the region. That's a big indicator that a pipeline like this is needed for us. On the commercial side, that's very important. And we're continuing to pursue additional customers. We anticipate signing many of those here in the near future. So very important to secure these companies as part of your system before moving forward on any project. But decreases the speculation of the need for a project and adds a level of certainty around it. So that's the commercial side that we've been working over the last several months to secure and have secured. And then the second piece is the permitting process. And I know the representative of the CLF will talk about this too, but from our perspective, what happens next and what's the other part of a major expansion project like this? So commercially viable and also permittable. And I know Jane and others have been at many of these presentations with me and know that I've always said that. We need to develop a project that is permittable. What that means is that it can meet and exceed the standards put forth by the state of Massachusetts and all the states in New England, as well as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the related federal agencies like the Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife Service, and others. So that's what we have been doing as well in the last 6 to 8 months, refining our project to get it to a stage where we believe it's permittable. And earlier this week, we did begin the process formally, what's called a pre-filing process with FERC to begin a formal discussion of our project. Over the last 6 months, it's been an informal discussion. Meetings like this, as the superintendent mentioned, this is not a public hearing. It's a gathering together information. But it begins a process, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So looking at the rest of the schedule and some of the key points about the project, which I'll also touch on, but the schedule, the September 15th part begins a process that will take us through 2018. Now this is a proposed schedule that we have put forward as a company. The FERC will need to verify and ratify this schedule. But we believe that this is a schedule that can generally meet the parameters of the state and federal agencies that are part of the oversight process. So for the next year, roughly till next fall, will be a scoping process, which means that there will be formal public hearings. The FERC will host scoping meetings, is what they're called, and they're more or less public hearings where testimony and comments will be taken on the record from the public. We'll also hold, as a company, open houses, which are required in the scoping process, and these will be scattered through the region. I suspect there will be one here in Pittsfield that bring in company representatives to give more detail about the projects, detailed maps of the project, for example, that the public will be able to inspect. Also, we'll be filing resource reports 1 and 10, which will show more detail about the scope of the project itself. It will talk about what route we have chosen, our preferred route, and also alternative routes that we are considering. All that will be identified in those resource reports. After that year of scoping and public input comment, then we anticipate the permitting process to start. So the fall of 2015, we'd actually file for our certificate from FERC. and also our permits from the state and the MEPA process that are part of that. Then follows a review by the agencies, both state and federal. The FERC will do an environmental impact statement as a draft, and then there'll be a final environmental impact statement, all leading to what we anticipate action on our certificate by FERC in the fall of 2016, and potentially, provided FERC approves of the project, some construction activity in the spring of 2017. So that's the overall very rough schedule of the project that will be refined more as we move forward through the scoping process. This slide shows a copy of the proposed route of the project. And as I said in Lenox last night, or yesterday when we had a meeting there, and all of our meetings, this is a very fluid process. And what this map really shows is a potential survey corridor for the project. It's over 400 miles, as you can see, beginning in Pennsylvania. And for description, the black lines on the project are our existing Tennessee gas system. That's the system that's been around for up to 50 years in the area. The colored lines are the new expanded system. So the blue line in Pennsylvania, New York, and then so there's a co-location, the purple line from Wright to roughly Richmond, Massachusetts, and then from Richmond to Dracut, the purple line, I think that's purple. Is it still purple? I can't see without my glasses here, but purple line that is taking us to Dracut. So the colored pieces are the new parts of the project. So we're 400 miles of additional infrastructure, some co-located. For example, in Western Mass, we're looking at co-locating with Western Mass Electric in places. We're co-locating with our existing infrastructure, and we're continuing to refine this route. We've probably made 100 changes in this route since we announced it as a proposed route several months ago. And I fully expect we'll probably make 100 or more additional changes. And some may be very significant, some may be small. I mentioned yesterday we've changed 100 foot to accommodate for a landowner concern to 10 miles to accommodate or address concerns from others. Mark Hamrick and I, our project manager, spent the entire day today in a helicopter tour of Massachusetts and New Hampshire looking at some of these potential alternatives. So what will be filed as part of this pre-filing process is not what the final route will be. There will be adjustments to it, and as I said, some minor, some major, as we continue to refine this process. This is the time for adjustments and a full analysis of our proposed route. And we look forward to continuing to work with the State Department of Transportation, the State Environment and Energy agencies, and the subordinate agencies to that, to try to adjust this route for significant concerns like Article 97 lands. You're probably familiar with those, state lands, state parks, state forests, and other areas. So we're continuing to work towards refinement on that, and you'll see a lot of that happening here over the next several months. As part of a pipeline project, too, we anticipate the main line project, going back to this, the purple line, to be about 36 inches, to be precise. But there will also be several smaller parts of the project. For example, you can see on this slide the orange-colored lines, which represent laterals. And those can be 18 inches, 12 inches, smaller pipes going to a particular location to service a customer. For example, you see the West Nashua lateral that is servicing Liberty Utilities in New Hampshire. So they've asked us, can you deliver gas to this particular area so we can expand our system? We've proposed a route that's part of that. All of this is part of the same application with FERC and will be discussed in more detail through the scoping process. From a regulatory perspective, a number of agencies have oversight over the project. The lead agency is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They will have the ability to grant a certificate of public convenience and necessity, which is required for us to move forward on the project. That will be a vote of the 5 members of the commission that are appointed by the president. Again, we expect that to happen sometime in the fall of 2016. The Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife Service, you see the list of state agencies, the energy and environment agencies in the state. So informal consultations have been underway for a while with some of these agencies. More formal consultations will be forthcoming here over the next several months. The state has a major role in the authorization of pipeline projects, and the FERC very often defers to the states for permitting pursuant to the state's purview over environmental issues. And each state is different, and Massachusetts has a very rigorous oversight in the environmental area, as does Massachusetts, Connecticut, and other states in the region. So I just mentioned Massachusetts here, but will also be required to get the applicable permits in all of the New England states. I mentioned before about the pre-filing process. This is an important public step in the process, and you can see here we've identified our docket number. And I encourage anyone who's interested in following this project and seeing whatever is filed about the project, you can sign up for free at the FERC website, ferc.gov, put in that PF 14-22-000, and you'll get everything that's filed to your inbox immediately after it's posted to the website by the FERC personnel. It's a very good way to keep track of what's going on. You can get actually a copy of all of our pre-filing documents that we filed earlier this week as well. You can access all the information on there. So I encourage you to sign up for that. It's a very good way to keep informed on the project. The FERC review process is extensive, many opportunities for public input and comment. This slide depicts some of those. You can see in the shaded sections particular areas for public and timelines for public review and comment. So I encourage you to, again, to visit the website. I'm sure that the CLF will have some more comments on this, but to be involved in this process. And that's encouraged by FERC, it's encouraged by us. It's an important time over the next year to let all voices be heard about the project, the routing, the purpose and need, etc. This slide lists current proposed route, what towns would in some way be impacted by the project, which means that in some way our pipeline would go through the jurisdictional boundaries of these towns. Not necessarily that we're going through town property, but somewhere in the jurisdictional boundaries our current route takes us. This shows Berkshire County and our current route as proposed. And the benefits of the project. I just want to touch on this for a couple of minutes because we certainly know this is a big policy issue and there are lots of concerns about the big issues, but there's also the economics of the project. In addition to additional gas supply for the region, there's also jobs that are part of it. And we've signed agreements with the laborers union that this will be a labor project and will likely create over 3,000 construction jobs. So the laborers, the operators, the teamsters, building trades will all be part of this project. That 3,000 is really a small number because the collateral jobs associated with that will go on for much longer than the project itself as the companies expand their systems. But that's what we expect to be over the construction period of the project. We're happy to have the support of the laborers union and other trade unions as well as business and industry associations who want the project to move forward. So as we are tonight, we're committed to outreach. I mentioned, I think we're at 35 town hall meetings so far. There's a list of the ones that we've been to so far, 33. And also briefing elected officials and other policymakers as they're working through our project and deciding amongst themselves how they want to participate in the process moving forward. We also try to be a good steward in the communities that we serve, partnering with emergency responders, schools, and others to find creative ways to move a project like this forward. This is one example of that. One example of what I expect will be dozens or more examples on this project should we go forward with the project. Ways to partner with land trust organizations or other environmental organizations where if there's an area where we cannot adjust our routing or cannot do what the impacted area would like us to do, there are opportunities to do other things. In this particular area, in the Highlands area in New Jersey, with a joint effort with the Highlands Council and the DEP, we purchased 137 acres of prime and critical wildlife habitat for the impacts that we made in the area. And this is above and beyond what we're required to do, but we do it because we want to be a good environmental steward as well. And we know that it's important for companies to step up and be part of solutions to issues that are brought forward by well-meaning organizations like the Highlands Council. And also the Kinder Morgan Foundation. This is a foundation that has been donating in the community, including the Berkshire Museum locally. And we look forward to being part of donations to arts and education organizations in the future. And that's my formal presentation. Happy to answer questions.
Very good, thank you. At this point, open to the commissioners for questions. The Kinder Morgan. Please.
Sam Haupt, Town
Sam, would you be kind enough to walk to the microphone on your side in order to hear for recording purposes?
Could you just explain why increasing storage capacity and those alternatives would not be a substitute for increasing transmission capacity? In other words, what are the costs associated with LNG and how they balance against the infrastructure upgrade that you're proposing?
Thanks for the question. Dodson from our commercial team, business development team, will address that.
So, in terms of natural gas storage, there's generally a couple of different types. The more traditional storage is underground storage, which is very prevalent, for example, along our kind of asset in north central Pennsylvania, ironically enough, very close to where some of the production occurs today. In New England, however, there's really not any underground storage availability just because of the geology that happens to be present in the region. Too much granite, pretty basically at the end of the day. So that leaves folks with LNG tanks, which is something that most local distribution companies have to utilize. Berkshire Gas, I believe, for example, has some LNG facilities in its system. There's nothing wrong with LNG at all. It's used widely throughout the region. It is used, those gas supplies, this is liquefied natural gas. If you cool natural gas to negative a bazillion degrees, I don't even know what it is, it turns to a liquid, and then it can be stored in tanks and then warmed up and turned back into a vapor when it's time to put it through the gas lines to end up in homes. That's typically used by most LDCs for what they call peak loads. In other words, for that coldest hour on that coldest day in the winter, for example, when they've run their pipeline supplies pretty much flat out, and they need to top off what they need to send to the homes and businesses in their territories. One of the reasons, there's a lot of reasons, one of the reasons why our pipeline and the other pipelines that serve the region too are running flat out full from the west to the east, which is kind of the black line again is our existing system that exists today, which is the traditional way that gas flows into New England, is because, ironically enough, a lot of the parties who bring in liquefied natural gas on tanker ships from other parts of the world into the New England region have stopped doing that, thereby requiring people like us to transport even more into New England from the west than we used to a few years ago. One of the reasons that is because the worldwide price of liquefied natural gas, and it's a world market, they can get a lot more money for that liquefied natural gas in Europe, Asia, for example, than they can in a lot of parts of the United States. So those supplies have dried up relative to a few years ago. That's one of the reasons, just one, why the pipelines are even fuller than they were. So LNG storage is a good thing. It happens every day. There's a cost to it these days, and the supply of that product is not what it used to be because of competition in other parts of the world. Underground storage is hard to pull off in New England because the geology just doesn't really work for it. Does that address the question?
Anyone else? Renee?
Well, I can't get much taller, but I'll try. First of all, thank you for being here this evening. Recently, there was an announcement of a joint Algonquin and Northeast Utilities proposal that would expand an existing pipeline using existing rights-of-way, and it also projects a start date that is exactly, I believe, the same as yours. However, it would go through Connecticut and eastern central part of Massachusetts. Northeast Utilities has announced that it would bring in gas for both regional thermal and electrical generation. I'm not sure your pipeline is doing that, but I was just wondering if you could comment on what this announcement, the impact of it on your plans. Thank you.
Sure. So Spectra Energy is another natural gas pipeline company, in case there's people in the audience who don't know. If you can see it, it's kind of faint. Yeah, there you go. They are my competitors, so I don't often point them out, but I will. This sort of faint green, you can barely see it, lines, that's part of their pipeline system. It starts in New Jersey, it traverses through sort of southern central Connecticut, and they have offshoots as well, and ends up, they primarily feed in the Massachusetts area, southeastern Massachusetts and the Cape, and then some parts of the southern Boston metro area. Spectra Energy is a good pipeline company. They run a good system safely and reliably, like we all do. We know a lot of our colleagues that work there. They're good folks. They have a plan as well to serve the parts of the region that they typically serve. They have a little different take than our project is. There's no doubt about that. The announcement that came out yesterday is they named their project, which is important to do, and they kind of described, as you mentioned, how they plan to sort of go forward. They now need to, I'm speaking a little bit for them, so I don't work for them. They now need to gather up some commitments from some parties who want to transport that natural gas on their system. I don't believe they've done that, but they're going to work hard to do that, I'm sure. And move forward. They're sort of beginning this process, as far as I can tell. Have a lot of work to do, as we've done some of that work already. But that's really all I know about their system. I do understand what you said, that it is largely a replacement or enhancement of their existing footprint, their existing faint blue line on the map. And so the service that they would be able to provide, presumably, would be to parties along that existing system. Not Berkshire County, for example. I don't see any possible way that could happen. Is that, okay.
Any other questions?
I can get shorter. You're projecting 3,000 employee impact as a function of this pipeline. Can you project how many of those would be local Massachusetts or local Berkshire County workers? And how many would be expert pipeline installers and would come in with a crew and then leave the area? Thank you.
I know we've got some representatives, the laborers here tonight, and they're the experts at where the jobs and the union locals that will be part of it. But I think there are 3 or 4 union locals that are part of the laborers that would be in the general construction area of the project. We anticipate local employees to be significant, and I'll tell you why. Because the laborers in Hopkinton, Mass. have a state-of-the-art training facility that specifically trains folks on pipeline construction. So typically, I think what you might be referring to is pipeliners would come in from other parts of the country and do a lot of the jobs. The difference here is, because the laborers have invested in this training effort, you already have a trained workforce here that I think are going to be a big part of those jobs. We've signed an agreement with the laborers union to utilize all union labor on the project. The process is that we will hire a general contractor or several general contractors that will then hire subcontractors and the workforce itself. But because of the trained workforce that's here and the laborers union being our partners on this project and gearing up for this project, they're preparing, I think, to provide a significant part of this workforce. But I would refer you to the laborers union here tonight or otherwise to get more specifics on that.
I'm Dana Bixby from West Stockbridge. I'm curious about the history of the pipeline system. Like, when were there no pipelines at all? And how has this network come into being to where it is today? And do you have a picture of where it would be in 50 years or 100 years? Is this network going to continue to expand?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And my name's Jim Hartman again. And I've been with Tennessee Gas for 34 years, my career. And when I first started, I had the opportunity to work with the old-timers, as we called them, who built the pipeline. So at the coffee bar or whatever, we'd hear the old stories about the pipeline and whatnot. And the original pipeline was constructed in the 40s, the late 40s. And the original pipeline was constructed in the late 40s and started in the Gulf of Mexico, the gas fields, and went up to Tennessee, to the war plants. And from that point, the pipelines were then extended further up to New England. And there was one pipeline at that time, which we call our 200 pipeline, and that is the pipeline that runs up along, no, I didn't want to do that, Alan. That's all right, I did it. Anyways, that pipeline is along the northern tier. There you go, thanks. And I'll do through just the green. There we go. That's the 200 line, and that was built in 1951, give or take, and then came into Massachusetts. And then, as there was a continued growth, we built what was called the 300 pipeline. And that was in the middle 50s, about 1955. And that came up through Pennsylvania, down into New Jersey, Westchester County, New York, and then up through Connecticut to our Agawam facility in Massachusetts. The lateral lines that we talked about earlier, that come off of that and feed the local distribution companies, those were constructed in about the 50 and 55 as well. So from that point, those pipelines satisfied the demand up until about the 1980s, which when I was hired. And at that point, there was expansion for more need, and we expanded the pipelines continuously from the 80s up until 2000, the middle 2000s, very prominently. And after that, it slowed down just a little until now this point. The demand has caught up to the supply, as Dodson talked about, and Alan, and now we're expanding again. Going further, I'm going to ask Dodson to talk about it, where he sees it going over the next 30 or 40 years.
So one of the reasons that has led to, we talked about the LNG kind of dropping off in terms of a supply alternative for people and for gas companies in New England. So another big driver to why pipelines and the local distribution companies are so full and have so many more requests for natural gas to come in every day than we can physically accommodate, and that's true. We have some statistics on that if that would be helpful. Is because the price of natural gas has dropped to a very low number, $2 per MCF. That's the unit of measurement that we use in our business. So that's a roundabout way to answer your question. So the pipelines are common carriers. We don't own the gas that's in our pipe. It's just a steel tube. The molecules of gas inside it are owned by other people. People buy the gas from wherever they want to buy it. They put it into our pipeline. They tell us through contracts, please move it here for us. And that's our job to do, safely and reliably, which is what we do. So the function of what of how the pipelines might grow or shrink or be added to over the next 10, 20, 30 years is really a function at the end of the day, this is a technical answer, is really a function at the end of the day of what those people who want us to transport it for them need to happen. One of the reasons why we're putting this project together is because the people in the region who need the gas have approached us and said, we need this much extra gas and we need you to get it here for us, please, for these particular people. So pipeline companies will seek to construct, add, modify their ability to transport gas into any particular market, not just New England. We do the same thing across New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York State, downstate, all along the way, to the extent that the people who are in that market require us to. And that's in fact what happens here. If there are various projections about what's going to happen to the production of natural gas in the future and the cost of that gas in the future, and if I knew exactly how that was going to turn out, I would be quite wealthy. And I'm not. If some projections continue the way they are, then natural gas should be a very popular fuel choice for the future. But we don't control that, and we don't control what the price is and how much it's produced or where it's produced. So it's really not something we can project, other than to say, when people ask us to transport gas, we try to do whatever we can to make that happen, as long as we can do it safely and reliably as we're supposed to do. Is that?
Hi, James Mullen, delegate from New Marlborough. In your presentation tonight, you have stated that New England is in an energy crisis. Could you expand on that a little bit, because it's sort of news to me?
We're laughing because he just keeps passing the mic. So that's a term that we use today and that you can Google and read and see that other people have used as well. And it can be taken as a little alarmist, but I would surmise that it's not entirely an inaccurate use of words. So by that, I think the parties that quote it in the press, for example, are referring really to the electric market. And CLF certainly knows a lot more about this probably than we do. Have been involved for a long time. We're not an electric distribution company or generation company, but we work with them a lot every day. So, and Alan alluded to this kind of earlier. So over the past, I don't know, 15-ish years or so, yeah? 2001. Yeah, give or take, 12, 15 years. A lot of natural gas power plants can run, the traditional power generation facilities, their fuels are coal, oil, or natural gas. And over the past 12, 15 years, many natural gas fueled power generation plants have been built all along the region, along our pipeline, so they have to hook up to a pipeline or a gas provider that can get gas to them so they can run their plant. And at the same time, environmental regs have kicked in, and so oil-fueled plants and coal-fueled plants have dropped off. And the natural gas plants have kicked in more, so to speak. The challenge, however, is that some of the rules that the natural gas generating power plants have to live with don't motivate them, it's a good word, to procure firm gas supply fuel to their plant. There's a lot of detail underneath that. But it's really hard because of the economic and regulatory rules that the generation plants have to live with for them to buy guaranteed natural gas and buy the right to transport it on our pipeline and others, for example, to the location where the plant sits. So sometimes when it gets really cold outside, especially in the winter, and our gas companies are using all of the gas that they have the rights to on our pipeline, sometimes it's hard to have gas left over for the power plants to use. That is what people sometimes refer to as this crisis. As natural gas-fueled power plants become more and more predominant in terms of generating electricity, it becomes more and more important for them to be able to obtain guaranteed natural gas to their plants in order to run. And as our pipelines get more and more full, and they don't have the rights on the pipelines to get it there, it's more and more and more of a challenge. So then people start wondering about reliability of it. People start getting worried. Alternate plans start getting made, like maybe we need to run the coal plants more. Maybe we need to run the oil plants more. And then that has its own cost to it. So that's, I think, what people are talking about with the crisis. It's really an electric concern more than it is really a gas concern.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe challenge might be a better word than crisis.
Worry, concern, yeah.
Will your project solve this challenge?
So there are two things that I put into the solve the challenge category. Number one is price. And number two is actually being able to deliver the gas physically to the place where the power plant sits. The New England users of electricity, the families, the homes and the businesses, as well as users of natural gas, are paying a premium today. You might have read about it in the press. Paying a premium today, paid a premium last winter to the tune of something over $3 billion, more incremental than most other regions of the country, because there is more of a demand for natural gas in the region than, frankly, people like the pipelines can physically bring here. So there are two things that our project does. Number one is price. When you create another way for that pent-up demand to be achieved, for the gas that is trying to get here, that needs to get here, here being the region, then that premium price that is sitting out there right now goes away. Basic supply and demand. The second thing is, okay, that's all well and good. You can get the price down by bringing in more, but then you have to actually get it to the place that it needs to be physically. So another key benefit of this project is, although we are building the new part, constructing it, you can kind of see right around sort of the Dracut area, it then interconnects with our existing system, the black lines, through which contracts can be, what's the right word, signed? Executed. To distribute those additional molecules of gas back around to our traditional system where our power plants are hooked up to us. So we've just solved doing what we can do for our company along our parts of the system. We've solved the price problem by being able to bring in the gas, and therefore the supply is equal to the demand that it currently exists. And we've solved the can you get it there problem, because we can then get it there once we get past Dracut through our existing lines. So if you solve the price problem and you solve the can you get it there problem, which is what we're trying to do, then the thinking goes, you've solved the concern.
Okay, because, yes?
Earlier in your presentation, you talked about the adjustments that you've made to date on the pipeline siding and kind of indicated that there are many of them that you expect to do in the future before you settle on the final route. Would you please share with us what your criteria are for making such adjustments?
Sure. They are varied. When you look at the siding of a pipeline, and just look at the purple piece, for example, we know on this project that we need to get from Wright to Dracut. As Dodson talked about, providing gas to New Hampshire, providing gas on our existing system, backflowing through our system, and hopefully providing gas to Maine. The quickest way to get from point A to point B is a straight line. So you obviously aren't going to construct a straight line of a pipe under any circumstances. So you're looking for a permittable line. So what is going to be the least impactful, considering, for example, the number of landowners that would be impacted by a certain route, environmental issues, wetlands, water bodies, threatened and endangered species, protected lands, like in the state of Massachusetts, Article 97 lands, co-location, where can you co-locate with additional existing infrastructure, overhead power lines, other pipelines that are out there, potentially roadways, Mass DOT properties. So you're trying to take all of that into consideration, and that's why you see here on this initial survey corridor a line that is not straight. And I mentioned since we've developed this survey corridor, we've made many, many adjustments, some small, some large, and we anticipate making many more. Those have been from the individual landowner that Jim and his team go out and talk to. We ask for survey permission from landowners to begin with. And what that means is, here's the 400-foot wide survey corridor that we are looking at for a potential pipeline route. We'd like your permission to come on the property and take a closer look. That would involve boots on the ground, civil survey, taking a look out there, walking on the property. That would then potentially involve environmental survey, where we're going to take a closer look for wetlands and water bodies and threatened and endangered species. It could take another level of cultural survey, any items of historic relevance, or maybe a cemetery. There could be any number of things that make that particular survey corridor not viable or adjustable. A landowner may say, I'm thinking about doing something with that piece of my property. Can you move your proposed route to the edge of my property? And many times we can accommodate that. It could be a town or an organization asking us to avoid a particularly environmentally sensitive area. For example, the state of Massachusetts has made it very clear of their concerns about Article 97 lands, state parks, state forests, areas of critical environmental concern. So trying to look at that, but also balancing co-location. For example, if you have a route that is going through an area that is not falling into one of those categories, may look better from those pieces, but perhaps it impacts more landowners. You may have an overhead power line, for example, going through a particularly sensitive area, but does it make more sense to go in that same corridor right next to the overhead power line rather than disturbing greenfield area? So what we're doing now, and we have been doing, and Mark and I were doing again today, and our team is doing every day, hundreds of folks out doing the survey process, is to find an area that putting all those pieces together is the least impactful. So that's how you get to a final route. And as I said, what we have filed in our pre-filing process is not final. It is proposed. It is preliminary. That will be refined over the next 12 months, leading up to our certificate filing, where at that time we will have a route that we believe is permittable, that can meet all of those standards, takes into all those factors for the state of Massachusetts, all the New England states that are impacted, as well as the federal agencies. That's how you get to a pipeline route.
How about 2 minutes if we want to stick to the 30-minute limit?
So perhaps one more question, Roger?
I'm Roger Bolton from Williamstown. Every pipeline system, including yours, has accidents. And there have been accidents on your facilities in various parts of the country, I know. I thought your answer to frequently asked questions on this was pretty lame, because you didn't actually say anything about what sorts of accidents you've had and what damages occurred. So could you give us some examples, maybe 2 or 3 kinds of accidents, maybe the ones with the highest probability, that might occur here, say in Berkshire County, what sorts of damages they would cause, and what sorts of response you would have? I'd like specific.
Yeah, and the way that you can get specifics about incidents, anything that's happening on our pipeline system or frankly, any system, is you go to the PHMSA website. I understand, I'll talk more about that, and then Mark will address this too, but I'm saying, if you want all of the specifics on all the incidents that are reportable for this pipeline system, for Spectra's system, for any system, the US DOT, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, has that available and accessible on their website, a detailed analysis of any incidents that are part of projects. We also publish on our website, and are the only company that does that, our safety record, and what we do and what the incidents are, that's all published on our website, and you can relate that to the industry. For what folks can be concerned about or interested in as far as pipelines are concerned. Our 50-year record here in the state of Massachusetts is a good record. We're not a perfect company.
You're not answering
I
my
will
question.
answer your question.
You're not answering my question. I asked for predictions.
A prediction.
I realize probabilities are associated with them.
Right.
But I'm asking for some specific examples of incidents.
Well, I was going to get to a specific example if you let me finish. We had an incident in Sandusfield, Massachusetts, for example, and that's the only major incident we've had in Massachusetts since the early 80s, Jim, is that correct? And that was related to another pipeline that we were constructing in the area and related to some blasting activity that we had related to that, which had an impact on an adjacent line. So that was an incident we had in the last 25 years in New England. It's the only incident of that type which actually affected a pipeline system where there was a evacuation of gas, not an explosion, but an evacuation of gas in Sandusfield. That's a specific instance. What you do to try to prevent those incidents is have a system in place that is state-of-the-art and exceeds industry standards in pipeline operations, maintenance, and monitoring.
I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator, but he's not answering my question. I asked for examples of accidents that will happen with some probability. They may be low probabilities. I understand that. I know a lot about probabilities, but I want some examples of what will happen with some probability.
So incidents that could happen on a pipeline system are impacts, third-party impacts are not a common cause, but if you're looking at causes of incidents to pipelines, it is third-party accidents that are at the highest levels of those. And what that means is you have an underground pipeline system. You have the above-ground markers that are part of that system. And if someone would dig or impact that system, an excavator or something, that could impact a pipeline, and there could be an evacuation of gas from that. There's a system in place called Before You Dig. It varies from state to state what exactly that is called, but to try to prevent those types of incidents. Pipeline systems, too, need to be maintained. If there's not a proper maintenance, there's not a proper inspection. Our system, as Jim mentioned, is 50 years old. There's no reason that that pipeline system can't operate for another 50 years if it's properly maintained. And I think companies, when you see incidents happening in other areas where there might be some failure of a system, it's because the proper protocols weren't watched. For example, pigging lines to make sure, running smart tools through the line to detect any imperfections that might be in the line, maintenance activities and replacement of pipeline areas that need to be replaced. Because we've had a 50-year system in the area doesn't mean I think we have probably 100 different operations underway now or in the process of replacement of certain sections and replacing pipes so that the system continues to function.
And let me just address that.
Yeah.
Over the last 20 years since the internal pigging process where you actually put a smart tool in, because one of the causes would be the pipe gets a dent on the outside, a third party could dent it, you don't know it, that dent could turn into corrosion, and that corrosion could turn into a leak or some failure. But how you predict that, how you look for that is we run these intelligent pigs through the line, we detect these, and then we go in and we dig those out, we evaluate them, and if don't meet the criteria of the pipeline, they're either replaced or sleeves are put on. And the technology is getting better and better, where years ago you could only run a tool through there and predict a 2% dent in the pipe. Now you can do 1%. You can find smaller anomalies in the pipe, and as the process goes, you'll see, if you look at the trends, that the incidents nationwide, whether it's Kinder Morgan or any of the other operators, Spectra, all the top operators, the trend's coming down because the technology is getting better to go in advance and find these areas of weakness. So that's, when you ask what is a possibility, it could be something on the pipe, but by proper maintenance and predictability, that's how you prevent that and lower the probability of those incidents. And a well-maintained and marked pipeline and patrolled like we do to prevent third parties from digging into it is a big prevention process of making sure no one digs into the pipeline to cause an incident, which is the major cause of incidents across the systems.
Is there any further response to any specific incidents in places as the commissioner requested? If not, I think we'll move on to our 10-minute break. Okay, thank you, Kinder Morgan. Thank you, commissioners. I assume it's still the will of the commission to have a 10-minute break? Okay, I have by my watch that it's 7 minutes after 7. We'll be back at 17 minutes after to begin with the second portion of the presentation. Well, thank you. I think if we're all ready, we'll get started with the second portion of the evening, which is a presentation by Shanna Cleveland, who is the Senior Staff Attorney at the Conservation Law Foundation. And after 30 minutes, or however much time you need, up to 30 minutes, we will again go to the commissioners for questions.
Thank you very much for having me tonight. And I may not be on yet. Can you hear me now? Nope. Who turned that off? I've got your glasses up here, so I'll just hold on to those. So, good evening. I'm Shanna Cleveland, and thank you very much for having me tonight. I'm going to focus primarily on answering the questions that Nat had sent to me in advance, but I also will talk a little bit about some of the context and some of the regional energy background and give you a little bit different perspective on the current energy system and the current energy needs that we face here in Massachusetts. I'm going to start with telling you a little bit more about the organization that I work with. Conservation Law Foundation is an environmental nonprofit group. We are a member-supported group. We have a fair amount of members out here and throughout Massachusetts and New England. We focus on the region of New England exclusively, and we are very focused on creating thriving communities in New England, and that means we work in a couple of different areas. One of our primary areas is clean energy and climate change, but we also have programs that are dedicated to being focused on the oceans, on clean water and healthy forests, and also on healthy communities and environmental justice. So when we look at the energy picture, we look at it and think about it from all of those perspectives. In terms of the work that we've done in the energy field, we have been around since 1966, but our focus on energy really came into being in the late 70s. We were one of the first environmental organizations to really push for energy efficiency as, and for people to think about it as a supply rather than simply as an idea that comes after everything else. So we had put out a paper in 1987 called Power to Spare, and a lot of energy efficiency programs were put in place in the region in Massachusetts around that time. We were also very involved in restructuring the electricity markets in Massachusetts in the late 90s, and we've also been very involved in the development and design of ISO New England and the markets that now operate to make sure that we have enough capacity on the electric system in New England to provide us with a reliable supply of energy, but we also make sure that we're looking at issues around cost, and we are very focused, obviously, on environmental issues and the environmental impacts of our energy supply, and especially the climate impacts of that supply. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a different perspective on what's been happening in this energy market here in New England. Over the past 15 or so years, one of the things that ISO New England has been focused on, that environmental groups have been focused on, and that regulators have been focused on is really making sure that the markets function in a way that creates the proper price signals and provides more of an exposure to the markets, to traditional generation facilities like coal facilities, oil facilities, natural gas, nuclear, trying to make sure that the markets actually reflect not only how much it costs to build that facility, but what some of the other impacts from that facility are and what the fuel costs are. In this case, one of the other things that we've focused on is creating strong environmental regulations that protect public health. So for example, one of the folks talked about the retirement of a lot of coal and oil plants. Part of that has come about because of strong environmental regulations that we have in place here in New England and that were pioneered here in New England to reduce mercury emissions, to reduce sulfur dioxide emissions. But another big part of that has come about because those older coal and oil-fired facilities were exposed to market forces. That means they could no longer go to the Department of Public Utilities and ask the ratepayers to pay for the cost to install environmental controls. Instead, they had to go to their shareholders to ask for those investments in environmental controls, and then those costs were reflected in the prices that they were bidding into the markets here in New England. And so that's been part of what has created the push towards retiring some of these older coal and oil-fired units, and frankly some of the nuclear units as well, but also the lower prices of natural gas and the intense increase that we've seen in energy efficiency, which has taken our demand from a curve that looked something like this and made it level off. So we have seen this retirement of coal and oil-fired facilities, and as a result, an increase in generation from electric power plants that run on natural gas. And one of the charts that Alan showed you showed the percentage of power generation that was coming from natural gas-fired power plants, and it's up to roughly 52% now. And the problem that's been occurring, the reason that people talk about this as a crisis, is that during the wintertime, because we have a lot of power plants running on natural gas now at the same time that we're heating with that natural gas for homes and businesses, we've seen coincident peaks, or peaks that are happening at the same time. And the fact that the local distribution companies, the companies that you buy your gas from for your home or your business to heat, have what are known as firm contracts, contracts that say Kinder Morgan or Spectra or whoever it is going to deliver that gas to you no matter what's happening on that day. They're paying a premium for that, and so they get access to that gas. The power generators have been buying their natural gas on the same pipelines, but through what are known as interruptible contracts, meaning that they can be interrupted whenever that firm capacity is being called upon. Not only that, but that firm capacity, that space in the pipeline, has to remain available for the local distribution companies to be used in the event that they need it. They've contracted for that space. And so what has happened is that the local distribution companies, when they find that they have more gas supply than they need for their customers, they are able to sell that excess capacity onto what are called secondary markets. And guess who buys the gas from those secondary markets? The natural gas power generators. But when they're buying that gas from the secondary market, they're often having to buy what are known as spot price contracts. So they're having to pay whatever the market is dictating at that time when you're at a constrained point in the system. And so that is what has created some of the price spikes that people are concerned about, and that really drove the New England governors to be very concerned about trying to make sure that there was enough gas on the system to prevent those price spikes. Now, whoever asked the question about whether or not a project like the Kinder Morgan proposed project would solve that problem, it was a great question. Because I think if you looked at the list of shippers that are slated to buy capacity on the proposed pipeline, you saw that a lot of those shippers were local distribution companies. There are only 3 power generator companies that Kinder Morgan currently supplies, and none of those were listed on the list of folks who had contracted for this new supply. So the question is not only price, but it is getting the gas to the place, to the power generators, who are the ones who have really created this price spike problem. Now, the other piece that's really important here is that this has happened, the retirement of these coal and oil-fired power plants and some of the nuclear plants didn't happen overnight. We didn't just wake up last winter and say, oh my God, we're too reliant on gas. This has been happening slowly, and it's been happening largely because a lot of those power plants that are retiring were 50 years old or 60 years old, some of them even approaching 70 years old. And so from our perspective, the retirement of those plants, in part because they have finally been reflecting the price of environmental controls and of maintenance on older facilities and on lower efficiency ratings, is a success and provides an opportunity for us to move beyond the current system that we have in place and to really move towards integrating more renewables into the system, more energy efficiency, more demand response, more storage onto the system. Now, the issue that we see primarily around building large new greenfield natural gas pipelines is that we all know that we have climate mandates here in Massachusetts and in other parts of New England as well. Natural gas, on most people's scale, emits less carbon dioxide than coal-fired power plants or oil-fired power plants. It definitely emits less at the stack. That is when it's being burned in a power plant. But here's the problem. Even newer natural gas-fired power plants are still emitting 800 pounds per megawatt hour or 900 pounds per megawatt hour of carbon dioxide. In the meantime, when the gas is being extracted from the ground, processed, moved, transported, distributed along the way, there are significant emissions from leaks, from not capturing the extra gas, so methane is leaking directly into the air. And there are some studies that have calculated that it's possible that along the life cycle of natural gas from wellhead to smokestack, it approaches the same level of greenhouse gas emissions as coal and oil-fired facilities. Now, whether you believe that particular piece or you believe that it's emitting far less just at the smokestack, it's still emitting a significant amount of greenhouse gases. For example, the last 2 years in Massachusetts, EPA publishes the list of the largest single stationary sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Well, now that the coal plants haven't been running as often, the #1 emitter is a natural gas plant. It's Mystic Station in Boston. So that's the #1 emitter of our greenhouse gases in Massachusetts. So when we look at this pipeline proposal, we look at what impacts will it have on this current situation, the issue with the wintertime price spikes, and we also look at what impact will it have on our ability to shape and build a power system that is consistent with the climate mandates that Massachusetts has in place and are consistent with the science that tells us we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that's really the perspective that we're coming from as we look at this issue. So now I'm going to move into answering some of the specific questions that Nat sent to me. And I'll go through these, and then if you have follow-ups about it, then we can do that. The first question was asking me to describe essentially the permitting process at the federal, state, and local levels. And the primary process in play here is going to be the process before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. FERC has kind of the overriding authority of permitting natural gas pipelines under the Natural Gas Act. And so there are really two pieces to that process. One will be the pre-filing process, and as Kinder Morgan mentioned, they did file their pre-filing application this Monday with FERC. And that docket number is PF 14-22. Now, the FERC website is actually really important, and I urge all of you and anyone in the audience who's interested in this to spend some time on the FERC website and get familiar with it. As Alan mentioned, there is a menu on the FERC.gov website that allows you to go to what's called the e-library, and you can look up that docket. You can just fill in PF 14-22. You can look up the docket, and you can subscribe to that docket so that you will get every filing that is made in that docket. It will just come directly to your email. The other thing that's important about signing up and getting familiar with the FERC.gov website is that during this pre-filing process, what will happen is Kinder Morgan will file a series of resource reports, and those will cover all sorts of issues relating to the proposed route, potential environmental impacts, a listing of every state and local and federal permit that they believe they are required to receive. And that's a really helpful checklist for you to have as you go through and look at some of the issues that you're concerned about in particular. And you will have the opportunity during the pre-filing process to file comments. And you do not need to intervene at the point of the pre-filing application. You can simply log in to FERC.gov and file comments. And it's really important during that process to take a look at the resource reports and think about whether your community is covered in that report. Look at the different reports and see where issues that are important to your community are outlined. And make sure that you see if there are corrections that need to be made about what resources exist in your community, or what concerns there are about particular wetland areas or conservation lands or anything like that come up, so that you can comment and tell FERC that that resource report needs to be modified. You also have an opportunity during this process, the pre-filing process, to make comments about what the scope of the review should look like, what the scope of the environmental impact statement should be. And that is an opportunity to talk not only about this specific project, but to talk about whether or not you think that FERC ought to be engaging in what's known as a programmatic review. As someone else mentioned, there are several pipelines that are currently being proposed for Massachusetts and for New England. And one of the options that FERC has is whether or not they should review all of those pipelines to see what the cumulative impacts of those pipelines will be. So that's another piece of the scoping process. Another potential issue for you to take a look at is whether or not there are areas that are mentioned in the resource reports that are incomplete. If you want to tell FERC they need, they looked at, the wetlands impacts, they looked at the impacts of crossing the Housatonic and dealing with RCRA, but they didn't look at the greenhouse gas emissions impact, or they didn't look at some of the local land conservation areas that we're concerned about. That's your opportunity. So that's the pre-filing process. And that will go on for a bit. There will be, as Alan said, there will be these resource reports that are filed, and you'll want to take a close look at those, especially the ones that relate to areas within your community. After the pre-filing process, there will also be, I should say, public meetings, public comment meetings. There was just one actually down in Rhode Island on the 16th around the Spectra Algonquin incremental market expansion project. And so FERC will come out into the communities. Often the Energy Facilities Siting Board, which is a Massachusetts state board, will also attend those meetings. And I believe in this case, the Massachusetts Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs submitted a letter to FERC yesterday asking that the Energy Facilities Siting Board be part of the scoping process and public hearings and public meetings that will be held around the pre-filing process. So there should be a number of public meetings and opportunities for people to submit comments. It's very important to take a look also at what FERC has said the guidelines are for submitting comments. Just 2 days ago, FERC issued a statement on filing effective comments with the agency. There are certain issues that they are responsible for looking at and other areas that they don't feel is within their purview. And so you want to make sure that in order for your comments to be effective, you're focused on the areas that FERC is specifically required to consider in those proceedings. So that's really the pre-filing process. They'll also begin working on the draft EIS during that point. The proponent will then file the formal application with FERC, and that's the point at which a community or an individual needs to decide whether they want to simply continue commenting or whether they want to file a formal motion to intervene in the process. And unless you file a formal motion to intervene, then you do not have any rights to appeal any decisions that are made by FERC. Or even more importantly, you don't have any rights to submit briefing or further responses to petitions and comments and other briefs that other parties have filed. So intervention gives you a legal status that you wouldn't have if you were just a commenter, and it provides you with an opportunity to really appeal any decisions that come out of it. During the course of the formal application, FERC will issue this public notice. They'll tell you what the deadline is for intervening. They will then prepare the draft environmental impact statement based in large part on the resource reports that were filed during the pre-filing proceeding. And they will publish the notice of that draft EIS in the Federal Register and usually give about a 45-day comment period for commenting on the draft environmental impact statement. Other agencies, EPA, for example, DOT, state agencies that are involved will comment on that EIS, and to the extent that your community, through either its Conservation Commission or other zoning bodies or other types of agencies that you have within your community, intends to do any permitting of the project, you would also want to be involved in commenting on that EIS. Once those public comments are in, FERC will issue a preliminary determination as to whether or not the draft EIS is sufficient and complete, or whether or not anything else needs to be addressed. Then they will file a response to comments. So they'll actually address any comments that were made on the EIS and explain why they did make a change or why they didn't. And then after that, the final EIS will be issued. And once that final EIS is issued, there's a record of decision that comes out, and then essentially that kind of confers on the project the ability to move forward in concert with FERC's determination that they will grant a certificate of public need. And the certificate of public need is important here because it does confer the power of eminent domain. So once that certificate of public need has been issued, then you really are in the area where the pipeline company can come out onto lands, can take that land if there is not a deal negotiated, and then would negotiate essentially a fair market value to pay for any land that was taken under the process of eminent domain. If you were an intervener in a proceeding, you could file what's called a request for rehearing on the issuance of the certificate of public need. You could then also file, to the extent that the agency denied that request, you could file an appeal of the certificate for public need in the federal court in the circuit where the decision was made. So it would be the First Circuit Court of Appeals here. Now, importantly, there are a couple of areas in which the states and the localities retain permitting authority. As you know, the state issues permits under the Federal Clean Water Act. They also issue permits under the Clean Air Act. They have their own Endangered Species Act here in the state. Your local conservation commissions issue permits in wetlands and waterways. FERC has issued guidance in a case in this area, in the Maritimes and Northeast Pipeline case, telling pipeline companies that they need to coordinate with local and state authorities in applying for and giving all the information that local and state authorities ask regarding their permitting processes. And so they will essentially be, as I think Alan's timeline showed you, they'll essentially be applying for a lot of the same state and local permits during the formal application process for the certificate of public need. And to the extent that a local agency or a state agency says, in order to comply with the Clean Water Act or in order to comply with some other ordinance or law, they need to condition the project so that it doesn't work on construction during the time when these fish are spawning. That type of condition can be put into both the local permits. It can also be put into the certificate of public need. So that's really the time when you're looking closely at your own permitting process and you're looking closely at FERC's process and trying to make sure that any conditions that the locality and the state think are important are rolled into that certificate of public need. There is the possibility, especially with respect to the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, for a state permitting authority to determine that the pipeline does not conform to their regulations that are implemented under those federal laws. And if that happens, then the state will often appeal the certificate of public need in order to make sure that the project complies with their regulations. So that's kind of the basics of the FERC process. Pre-filing, comment, you don't need to intervene. Once the formal application is filed, FERC will issue a notice telling you when intervention is due. I strongly recommend that anyone who wants to intervene in that proceeding find counsel and make sure that it's someone who has experience with FERC. It's a specialized area. One of the questions I think I've already answered is at what stage does it receive a FERC docket number, and at what stage is it necessary to file the comments or intervene? The docket number for the pre-filing is going to be different than the docket number for the formal application itself. But if you subscribe to the pre-filing docket, FERC will also send you a notice when the formal application is filed. We've also covered essentially how citizens can comment. You do that by signing up at the FERC website, and there is actually a link to e-comment. There's also a very helpful document on FERC's website called the Citizens Guide to Pipelines, and I highly recommend that document as well. We've covered what the difference is between filing a comment and making a motion to intervene. Intervention is really what you need to do if you want to have that legal right to file briefs and appeal a decision. Obligations that do come along with becoming an intervener are that you have to serve any filings that you make at FERC on other people who are on that service list. And what that means is you essentially have to email them any of the filings that you're making in the docket to make sure that they have notice of what you have filed in the docket. It also, one of the other questions that you had was how the state and local permits are factored into the federal permit process. Essentially, FERC can determine that conditions that are being proposed or required by a state or local agency are outweighed by the need for the pipeline. So what you really need to make sure that you do as a local official is, or a state official, is provide FERC with all of the information about the reasons that your town has for requesting or trying to require a specific condition. And it's very important to create a record to provide, to the extent that you can, expert testimony. That may be somebody who works in the engineering department of your town, or it may be someone who works on the Conservation Commission, and maybe somebody who works in the water treatment facility or what have you. But having someone who can testify about the reasons for the conditions or the requirements that the local permitting authority is seeking to have implemented is very important to create a record for that in front of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission so that they understand why that condition or requirement is important and is necessary. If a town or the state tries to impose a condition that FERC deems unnecessary and that FERC feels acts to attempt to preempt its authority, then FERC can say, no, we don't think that that condition or requirement is necessary. And at that point is when you could appeal this decision. One of the questions asked about whether or not cities and towns are able to hire outside consultants at the proponent's expense to review impacts under Chapter 44, Section 53G. I think the ideal answer to this question is it would make sense for towns to approach the proponent about potentially doing this. But if FERC feels that that is being invoked solely to obstruct the process, then I think FERC would be less likely, I don't think that FERC would be likely to abide by that process being used. I think it's always worth approaching the developer, and Kinder obviously has worked with communities in the past to come up with programs to, they have the one program about setting aside other land. Developers are often willing to provide funds to a town or community to hire an outside consultant, but it's one of those things that you can certainly press it. If FERC determines that it's being done to obstruct the process, then you might not be able to use that.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but at this point, we're through with the 30-minute presentation portion and would hand it over to the commissioners for questions of Attorney Cleveland.
Great.
Thank you. Hi. How is intervener status evaluated?
So there are specific regulations that govern what you have to show in order to intervene. There are two things about it. One is that you typically want to explain to FERC how your town, or if you're an individual applying, how you will be affected by the pipeline. And so one of the ways to do that is to show that it could have an economic harm to you or to the property that you own. Another way to show that as a town or a permitting agency would be to show that there are permits that you have to evaluate whether or not to approve for a project. Another piece would be whether or not you have other interests, such as local conservation lands that you may own. So you want to provide some sort of showing that your town, or if you're an individual applying or a group applying, that group will be directly affected by the proposal.
And that's, excuse me, and that's how it's looked upon to be granted this intervenor status?
Right, and there are two things. One is there are these standards that you look at whether or not you're directly affected. But the other thing is that in FERC proceedings, once you file your motion to intervene, if no one files an objection to your intervention within 5 days, then you're automatically granted intervenor status. So, typically, especially where it's towns or individuals or states who are going to be affected, I haven't seen many objections to petitions to intervene. But that's, again, something where you do want to have legal counsel in order to take you through the regulations. The Citizen's Guide will tell you how to do it, but I think it's really worthwhile to have counsel who's filed petitions to intervene in the past.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you. I think early in your presentation, I got the sense that you agreed that there was, at least during these peak times, issues with gas supply, whether for local distributors to business owners and residents, as well as any power generators. So if the idea is that the capacity to transmit gas is not the answer, or shouldn't be part of a solution, I'm wondering what's going to bridge the gap between retiring these older coal plants and renewables. If you've ever been involved in trying to site a renewable energy project, you'll understand that, the governor had certain goals in terms of generating renewable electricity, but the demand for electricity it doesn't seem to abate, and the demand for gas certainly is increasing as people, even on a residential basis, anecdotally, are converting from oil to gas every day. And we have a boiler salesman here who will tell you everybody's buying gas boilers, nobody's buying oil equipment. So how do we get there without, to some point where, yes, maybe conservation measures and renewables will help, but isn't gas the bridge? And if they're running at full capacity now, what do we do? What's the solution?
Sure. It's a great question. It's one that we get asked a lot. So essentially what we're looking at right now is a situation where we do need some form of incremental supplies of natural gas. And CLF has proposed a couple of, kind of a suite of options. One of those options would be better utilization of our existing liquefied natural gas infrastructure. When I think it was Dodson who was talking about LNG supplies not coming in as much over the recent past, that's true. They haven't been supplying as much natural gas over the past couple of years, but there are liquefied natural gas companies who are very interested in supplying LNG during those critical peak times in the winter. And one of the things that we proposed was including liquefied natural gas in what was called the Winter Reliability Plan that ISO New England put out in order to meet some of the concerns around price spikes over last winter. And this winter, LNG will actually be part of that Winter Reliability Plan. And so we'll see what types of products the LNG companies such as GDF Suez and others, Repsol, offer into the market. But one of the things that they have been telling both market participants and the public and NESCO, the New England Governors Group, is that they are ready and willing to provide more products, more types of capacity for sale on the market of LNG. So LNG is a short-term solution. when the New England governors came up with this, let me just grab a drink of water here, sorry. Came up with their proposal to put in place a tariff that would pay for new natural gas pipelines. They had Black & Veatch do an analysis of the current situation, supply and demand on the system, potential solutions to meet those problems. And what the Black & Veatch study essentially found was that LNG and more efficiency and renewable generation and distributed generation could meet those demands if we invested in those products. But what they also found was that the proposed Algonquin Incremental Market project, the smaller project that's already proceeding before FERC that Spectra has proposed, would essentially get rid of that, what's known as the basis differential during the wintertime from the period of around 2017 to about 2023. And so that's essentially about a 6-year period, if you think about it, that we have to really concentrate on better aligning the gas and electric markets to make sure that we have more liquidity in the gas markets, to better utilize LNG, but also to ramp up energy efficiency programs and to ramp up renewable thermal generation. So we would propose a kind of a suite of alternatives instead of one big pipeline to overbuild the supply and
I
come
feel
in.
bad you're losing your voice.
No, it's okay. I've been talking all day, so I apologize.
All right, thank you.
Could I ask you to address one question that we haven't gotten to? And that's,
Sure.
That's the question 15 here. Because we're engaged.
Right. So the question is, what is the best way for the Berkshire Regional Planning Committee and localities to be involved at FERC? I apologize. And I should be clear. I can't give you legal advice. I'm not, not acting as your attorney here to tell you this. But as someone who has been before FERC in several different dockets and who works regularly in the ISO New England markets committees and reliability committees, what I would recommend is that the towns and the Planning Commission intervene formally into the process, and that you look very closely at those resource reports that are being filed during the pre-filing process, because whatever record FERC has before them at the end of those processes is what FERC is going to base their ultimate decision on. So if you're not formally involved in that process, then you're not going to be able to enter information into that record to inform the commissioners as they come to a decision about what conditions are necessary, what the conditions on the ground are, and what the appropriate route and scope of the environmental impact report should be. So I would say it's pretty critical as people and entities who are going to be involved in making your own permitting decisions, but also in protecting community land and community public safety and community public health. And to some extent, a lot of communities now have their own energy policies. I think it's really important to be an intervener in the process.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Good evening, CJ Haas, Pittsfield. My question is more about the local process and the ability of, in this case, Pittsfield. Typically, a utility company would be subject to a special use permit. So obviously, there's a lot of discretion in making that type of decision when reviewing that application. I just want to be clear, as part of this process, our local planning board would lose a lot, or zoning board of appeals in this case, would actually lose a lot of its discretion, but have the ability to make reasonable conditions attached to an approval. I was a little unclear of what kind of latitude I mean, it sounds like, I'm not saying that in this case the zoning board of appeals would deny, but if in this case it denied a special permit, would that really be up to FERC to say, oh, that was a reasonable decision to be made? Because essentially it would be totally altering the route of the pipeline if Pittsfield was saying no. And I'm not saying that's a position Pittsfield has, but I'm trying to understand what really, as this project moves forward, as being one of the people that would be reviewing this project, I'm trying to understand that a little better. And I understand that we would need to deal with our own legal counsel, but I think some of the other municipalities here that will be involved in the process will have these same types of questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's a great question. And, one of the things about our system of government is, it's a federalist system. And so the federal government does have supremacy, but it tries to work in cooperation and coordination with the states and protect states and local rights. And so what I would say is that the first thing that a community wants to do is look at the proposed project, the proposed route, and look at whether or not it meets the criteria for any number of local permits that you would normally be looking at issuing or reviewing for a project of this type and nature, going through the areas that it goes through. If they're zoning ordinances, if there are bylaws, if there are wetlands issues. If the project is subject to those, if it meets the criteria to be subject to those special use permits or whatever it is, then the town can then initiate that process and make sure that the company comes in for an application. Once the company files an application, what's important is for the town to move forward with that process as they would under any other circumstances, looking at the regulations and the guidance that they've put in place in the past for issuing those permits and for making determinations and building an appropriate record in order to support whatever decisions the town eventually comes to. So making sure that to the extent there are conditions or rejections, that the town fully explains why that is an appropriate decision based upon the special permit criteria or the bylaw or the ordinance, whatever it is, so that you've created that record. If the pipeline company feels that that condition or the conditions of that permit obstruct their ability to build the pipeline, then they will probably go to FERC and ask FERC to intervene. Now, at that point, FERC has a decision to make, and that is whether or not they agree with the city or town's determination, and whether or not those conditions can be compatible with building a pipeline, or whether or not those conditions will prevent it altogether. And you'll then have the opportunity with FERC to explain, why these conditions are appropriate and why they're necessary. But that would happen not just, as part of your process, but that also could happen in front of FERC, and you could then appeal any decision that was made by FERC that tried to preempt the local community's decision to the federal court. Does that cover it? Okay.
Roger Bolton from Williamstown again. I have a question about the environmental review process. Most of the discussion here, in your half of the program anyway, has been about whether the pipeline should happen. But I'd like to focus on another issue, which is, if it does happen, how can we make sure that the process of review is robust, democratic, have a lot of public presentation and cover the essential facts. So, for example, as background, the ENF filed for a minor proposal, in the scheme of things, the Sandusfield Loop had serious deficiencies. This commission's environmental review process uncovered some of those. The Commonwealth Department of Conservation and Recreation uncovered some of them. They were serious enough so that the Commonwealth Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs denied the applicant's request to skip one of the usual stages in the MEPA process. So far, I'm troubled. So what, can you give us some practical advice other than the one about trying to get some money for, to help out? What is your practical advice on how we can maintain a very good process of environmental review in case the pipeline is built?
That's a great question. I think, a couple of things. One, the folks that you have working within your communities in particular areas, in public works and safety departments, in the conservation commissions, in the environmental permitting part of your local community, those people are great resources. They know a lot about how to evaluate particular claims and how to evaluate permit applications and review. But what they also have are great relationships with people at the Commonwealth and at the agencies of the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth has perhaps more resources to pay scientists and experts and outside consultants. And I would encourage communities to work with the Commonwealth to really leverage those relationships to make sure that you're able to ask questions and get information, and where the Commonwealth doesn't have an answer, that you can agree on going out to get an outside expert to help both the Commonwealth and the locality answer those questions from someone who has industry expertise or the environmental expertise that you're looking for. I think it's really important, communities, people work really hard and they do great jobs, but sometimes if you haven't permitted a pipeline before, you don't necessarily know what questions to ask. And so there are people within the state agencies who have experience doing that, but to the extent that they don't, they at least have more resources so that if you all have a question and nobody's got the answer, you can go out in collaboration with them to bring in some experts who can really provide you with an independent review of what you're looking at. I think that's really important.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Renee?
I'm wondering if FERC gives any special...
Can you make sure to speak up?
I'm wondering if FERC gives any special consideration where water resources are involved, such as town water supplies, watershed, etc., and whether you could, as the second part of this, comment on any strategies or things to include or thoughts to for the local municipalities to be aware of. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, FERC does look at issues around public drinking water supply, around rivers and streams. EPA is likely to get involved in the review of the environmental impact statement. I think one of the questions that someone had asked was about the fact that there is a cleanup going on the Houstonic River right now, and to the extent that the pipeline goes across this river or any other rivers, then there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed. I'll list just a couple, but I think ideally the town working with whoever is in their water department and whoever's on the Conservation Commission with respect to wetlands, it's really important to make sure that those folks have the resources that they need to assess what the potential impacts of a pipeline could be, and to work with state officials to the extent that they have questions like we just discussed. But there are a couple of issues that I'll kind of highlight. When you're dealing with river crossings, for example, there may be, one of the ways that pipelines tend to be built across rivers is through what's known as HDD, and it's horizontal directional drilling. So essentially the idea is that instead of just having the pipeline go straight across the river, you would drill down, and then underneath the river, and then back up and out. So, there are a lot of questions that come up. You have to be very careful about where you're planning to locate the pipeline crossing to make sure that the geology is not going to be negatively impacted by that type of an operation. There's also the issue of getting heavy equipment into an area to do that type of drilling. And if it's an area that, for example, is part of a conservation parcel, then you're looking at having to, put in essentially, at least for the short term, a road big enough to bring in the equipment. So that's one piece is, wherever there are river crossings, is that you need to think about that. Another piece is that wherever you're crossing a river that is impacted, like the Housatonic or in some places the Connecticut, where you're worried that there are contaminants that are on the riverbed, you want to be very careful about whether or not any activity in that area could stir up those contaminants. And so that's another big piece that, I know people who build pipelines are aware of that and they're thinking about that, but it's also very important to make sure that the towns and communities who are impacted by that are also giving their perspectives on it. Because, what we tend to find as an environmental advocacy nonprofit is that the more people that are involved in a process, the more perspectives that you have, the fuller the picture is. Otherwise, you kind of get used to doing something, coming at it from one perspective. There might be something that you miss that someone who, works for the town water treatment center or who is, concerned with the town water supply would think of that nobody else would. I think another question is that I would specifically, be interested in would be, are there wells in the area, that people are drinking from as opposed to being hooked into the system, and is there potentially any impact from those? Just in terms of incidents, I would say, as Alan pointed out, typically when there is an incident on a pipeline, a lot of those incidents are caused by third-party damage. It's called third-party damage. It means that somebody, was out doing construction on their farm and they had a backhoe and they didn't call in to find out where the pipelines were, and they dug down and either hit it and maybe dent it and cause corrosion that later turns into a leak and potentially an explosion, or they displace ground around it that can affect the integrity of the pipe. And so one of the things that's really important is making sure that those pipelines are very well marked and that pipelines aren't going in areas where there is likely to be blasting activity from, there's recently some legislation that was proposed to make sure that pipelines don't go within, I think it was 100 feet of any blasting activity. To the extent there are any working quarries still in the area, you've got to be worried about that. I think those are kind of some of the primary concerns that I would look out for. And then one of the other pieces I would say is making sure that you understand very clearly what the operations and maintenance of the pipeline will entail, what types of, if any, impacts there will be on vegetation in the area, how often portions of the pipeline are likely to need to be replaced or looked at, and what types of environmental impacts that could have.
Any other questions? No other questions? Then we will end that portion. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Alan Hoare and the team from Kinder Morgan, and to Shana Cleveland. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you to Dr. McCandless for moderating this meeting for us. Thank you to the commission members who came out to participate in this. We have a lot of work cut out for us in the future. And thank you to the audience. Thank you for your respect for the process that's going on here. We appreciate that. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.